I was very excited for the first Anthony Joshua Dillian Whyte fight. Longtime subscribers will know I was hyping that fight for some time because I felt like a lot of British boxing fans were sleeping on it. I felt like a lot of British boxing fans were sleeping on Dillian Whyte and didn't realize how dangerous he was going to be for Anthony Joshua. I did a video, which is still up on this channel, in which I said that I was actually looking forward to AJ versus Dillian Whyte more than I was looking forward to Mayweather Pacquiao. At this time, Mayweather Pacquiao had not yet happened, and I got a hell of a lot of stick for saying that I was looking forward to AJ versus Whyte more than Mayweather Pacquiao. But I genuinely was. That's why I kept saying it, because when you have two fighters in the embryonic stages of their career who have a beef from the amateur days, who have got a chip on their shoulder and they're young and hungry and they've got everything to prove, that's usually when you get the best fight, the most explosive fight. That's when the two guys are going to fight, generally speaking, more often than not, at their most reckless, when they're young and in that kind of situation, when they're trying to prove themselves. But that was many years ago now. Today is 2019. Anthony Joshua has come on leaps and bounds since then as a fighter, mentally, physically, technically, and obviously financially. It's hard to believe that Anthony Joshua is quite as hungry as he was back then. But the same goes for Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte is now a pay-per-view headline fighter in the UK. This guy has made a lot of money in his past few fights. Past two fights, to be precise. I mean, I can't imagine he made bad money against Lucas Brown, but certainly in his last two fights against Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora, headline pay-per-view, he must have made a pretty penny. And look at the way Dillian Whyte fights now compared to how he used to fight. He's not as fiery. You compare the second Chisora fight to the first Chisora fight. Dillian Whyte far more disciplined, far cooler, and I think a lot of it does come down to maturity, and I'm talking about professional maturity. Maturing as a fighter, learning to stay calm, making the right decisions at the right time. I think a lot of it comes down to that. But I also wonder whether some of it is down to the fact that Dillian Whyte is now waking up in silk pajamas. And that's a metaphor, obviously, from Marvin Hagler. Dillian Whyte just seems in a better place to me in his life, just happier, not as angry, not as hostile as he used to be. And with the amount of money he's been making, why wouldn't he be happier? Things are going good for him. His relationship with Eddie Hearn now seems to be a lot better since he started making good money. Have you noticed that? But, prior to, let's say, the Lucas Brown fight, Dillian Whyte was always frustrated with Eddie Hearn in interviews, even contemplating leaving Hearn and going elsewhere. But since he started making all this money, now it seems like him and Eddie Hearn are relatively cool. And that's a good thing, obviously. In one sense, in terms of Dillian Whyte's happiness as a human being, it's good. But does being young, frustrated, hungry, etc., give you an edge? Many or most people would say it probably would. And so how does this relate to Anthony Joshua right now? Well, I don't think Joshua and Whyte, from what I've seen, have the animosity towards each other that they had going into the first fight. I just don't buy it. To me, the animosity which they're ostensibly expressing towards each other is manufactured. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel real to me. In the lead up to their first fight, that was genuine beef. Yeah, that's why they both came out, particularly Joshua, fighting reckless. It was like a street fight. But this time around, I think that they have built up a mutual respect. And off the back of their first fight, Dillian Whyte in particular has built an entire career. There were very few people, I was among the few I'm sure some of you were too, but there were very few people who even knew who Dillian Whyte was prior to the Joshua fight. And those who did know who he was, they weren't taking him serious. Most of them. But after the Joshua fight, well, the whole world changed for Dillian Whyte, and it hasn't been an easy road from Dillian Whyte from then to now at all. It's been very tough. But in terms of building a profile, that Joshua fight gave him a massive boost. Especially given what Joshua did after the Dillian Whyte fight. He handled everybody with ease up until Klitschko. Nobody had given him any problems. So that elevated Dillian Whyte's reputation in the minds of the British public. But he has eventually got to the point, through hard work, beating the right opponents, taking advantage of that springboard that the Anthony Joshua fight gave him, and catapulted himself into a position where he's a headline pay-per-view act. He's earning lots of money. And he knows, I'm sure, that without that Joshua fight, all of this would have been a lot more difficult. So I would have to imagine that part of him does respect Anthony Joshua. For example, Joshua put Dillian Whyte on several of his undercards, did he not? He was certainly on at least one of them. He was on the undercard of Joshua versus, was it Takam or was it Parker? Because he fought Robert Helenius, right, on one of Joshua's undercards. And he also fought, he fought another one of Joshua's undercards when he fought Chisora the first time. Was that on the Molina undercard? I believe it was. So Joshua didn't have to do that. So there must be some respect there from Dillian Whyte towards Joshua for allowing him to fight on his undercards, for giving him that kind of platform. And there must be some kind of respect from Anthony Joshua, to give Dillian Whyte that platform, There is mutual respect there, and there has been for some time. So for it to just out of the blue evaporate and all of a sudden they're at each other's throats again, sorry, people, I don't buy it. It seems like a forced situation. I don't think they really hate each other. Not anymore. I think they're in a different place mentally now than they were going into the first fight. And as much as Dillian Whyte deserves a title shot, and trust me, as far as I'm concerned, no contender in the world, in any sanctioning body, deserves a title shot more than Dillian Whyte. Above everybody else, he's earned it. But be that as it may, I just don't want to see Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte 2 in April. I don't want to see it. I'm not saying it's a terrible fight, but it just doesn't fill me with excitement. And the energy, I know it might sound a little esoteric to some people, but the energy for this fight just isn't there right now. Maybe that will change over the next few months if they do sign to fight. But right now, I just feel like the energy for this fight is not there. The atmosphere isn't there among the crowd, between the fighters. It just don't feel right. Dillian Whyte versus Miller, that has some energy to it, at least to me. Dillian Whyte versus Miller, even AJ versus Miller, that's got energy to it. Dillian Whyte versus Tyson Fury, that's got some energy about it. Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury, loads of energy about it. Either one of them versus Deontay Wilder, has got more energy to it than AJ versus Whyte too. It's just, I don't know what it is about that fight. It's just not doing it for me at all right now. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about this interview right here and Dillian Whyte's reaction to AJ in the ring after his victory in the rematch over Derek Chisora and some of the other interviews he's done recently. What do you think about this AJ Whyte rematch potentially in April? Is it something that interests you? Maybe you feel differently to me. And also, in this interview here, maybe I'll do a separate video about it, but Dillian Whyte is given a couple of names. One of the names he's given is Alexander Usyk. And he says nobody knows who Usyk is. And he seems to infer that he wouldn't really be interested in that fight at this stage. That he's more interested in Wilder, Fury, Joshua. But Usyk is not really on his radar right now. I think that from a hardcore boxing fan's perspective, Usyk versus Dillian Whyte, Usyk, it's a great fight. A fight I'd definitely like to see. In fact, that to me has got more energy to it than AJ versus Whyte. So yeah, I'd like to see Whyte versus Usyk. Is Usyk a household name in the UK? Obviously not. Usyk is, for me, top 3 pound for pound in the world, at least. And I'm not somebody who's really big on pound for pound lists, just to clarify my position. But definitely was fighter of the year 2018 for me, without question, Alexander Usyk. So I've got the most amount of respect for him, and I hold him in the very highest regard. But as, as a commercial entity, how big is Usyk? Well, he did knock out Tony Bellew, and that was a big fight, was it not? So you would have to imagine that Usyk does have some kind of profile. I know knocking out Bellew is not the same as knocking out a Joshua or even knocking out a David Haye. But Tony Bellew is pretty well known in the UK. I'm not saying he's a household name. I'm not saying Tony Bellew can walk down any street in the UK and be instantly recognized. Not necessarily. But he's pretty well known. Pretty well known. So, Dillian Whyte is looking at risk reward as most top level fighters do. And I'm sure he knows that Usyk is a fantastic fighter. He knows that. Dillian Whyte is one of the most knowledgeable boxers in the game right now. I'm telling you, if any of you are sleeping on Dillian Whyte's boxing knowledge, then more fool you, because this guy knows boxing. You ever listen to Dillian Whyte's interviews and hear him talk about different fights and different styles and strategies and the mindset of different fighters? Dillian Whyte knows what he's talking about when he comes to boxing. Don't let his, Jamaican accent and slightly broken English fool you. He knows his boxing, this guy. One of the most knowledgeable professional boxers when it comes to actually, boxing itself. And when I say one of the most knowledgeable professional boxers, I'm talking about active boxers, people who are still fighting now, not the Mike Tysons and all them kind of guys who are boxing historians. But in terms of active boxers, Dillian Whyte is one of the most knowledgeable about boxing. So he knows exactly how good Usyk is. He's watched many of Usyk's fights, I'm sure. And he's looking at that and he's thinking about the risk reward like, unless they're going to pay me crazy millions, do I really want to step in there with Usyk? Because interestingly, he did entertain the possibility of fighting Joe Joyce. That's interesting, isn't it? To be kind of dismissing the idea of fighting Usyk, but saying, oh yeah, Joyce is a good fight. That's interesting. Again, Dillian Whyte is a warrior. There's no way on earth that he would be scared to step in the ring with Usyk and trade blows with him. Of course he's not. But from a business perspective, when he's weighing up the risk reward of fighting Usyk, he probably doesn't think it's that appealing. Let's just be real. Yeah, that's the only way I can make sense of his reaction to Coogan suggesting he get in there against Usyk. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about Dillian Whyte versus Anthony Joshua, the rematch. Is it something that interests you? Do you, like me, think that the beef this time around is totally fake and manufactured and that there'll be little animosity between the two? And that potentially could result in a more subdued performance by both men if they were to fight than it was first time around? Or do you think it will be a great fight? Is it something you are desperate to see in April? If Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury can't be secured as opponents for AJ, would Dillian Whyte be your first choice after that? He also talked about Luis Ortiz. I do have to mention that. And, he said he's not particularly at this point in time interested in fighting Luis Ortiz because Ortiz doesn't really bring anything to the table right now. And that's fair enough, to be honest with you. If they could make if they were to order Dillian Whyte versus Luis Ortiz as a final eliminator for the WBC, with the winner fighting Deontay Wilder next, I don't see how Dillian Whyte could turn that down and come up with a valid excuse. He was offered the Luis Ortiz fight as a final eliminator, but only as a second mandatory, not as a first mandatory. And with the way the WBC are, I mean, look how long they've made Dominic Breazeale wait for his mandatory shot. Even though Dominic Breazeale is ranked way below Dillian Whyte, he's become mandatory for whatever technical reason. But look how long he's had to wait for his mandatory shot. Is he ever going to get his mandatory shot? Dominic Breazeale's been waiting over a year. So if Dillian Whyte was to fight Ortiz, let's say he beat Ortiz, okay? He might not, but I'm just hypothetically speaking. Let's say he took on Ortiz, beat Ortiz. He might have to wait, what, 18 months to get his shot? Does he really want to do that? Or does he want to go and fight somebody else who is more well-known for a lot more money? And let's be real, more attractive risk-reward scenario than Ortiz. Ortiz is very high risk for Dillian Whyte, but not that much reward. A guy who don't speak English, a guy who's getting up there in age. When you beat a guy who is, God knows how old Ortiz really is, how much kudos do you really get from it? I know Wilder and his fanboys have been going crazy about Ortiz, but if Dillian Whyte was to beat Ortiz, there are going to be people shooting it down. He was an old man. He's been inactive, and the Wilder fight took it out of him, so on and so forth. Now, don't get it twisted. I would love to see Dillian Whyte versus Luis Ortiz. That would be a priority fight for me, in fact, for Dillian Whyte. I'd love to see Whyte versus Ortiz. But just like I did in my Amir Khan video, I have to play devil's advocate and say, okay, let's look at it from Dillian Whyte's perspective. What does he gain from fighting Ortiz? Financially, there are probably other fights out there like Miller and others, maybe even Breazeale, where he could sell more pay-per-views, make more money. And for me, the Breazeale fight is far less risky than the Ortiz fight. The Miller fight, I think, is very risky for Dillian Whyte. I've made no secret of the fact that, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Dillian Whyte would destroy Miller, but in my opinion, Miller would beat Dillian Whyte. In my opinion, Ortiz, and this is going to probably upset a lot of people, but in my opinion, Ortiz is actually a more winnable fight for me than Miller is for Dillian Whyte. I'm not saying Whyte can't beat Miller. He definitely has a chance of beating Miller. But I just feel stylistically, Ortiz wouldn't be as physically imposing as Jarrell Miller is for Dillian Whyte. You know, Ortiz is going to box Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte's going to box Ortiz and box fight here and there. So I think it would be a fight where Dillian Whyte would obviously have to watch out for Luis Ortiz's left hand. Definitely, he's got a lot of power on that shot. But it's going to be more of a, not completely a boxing match because they will fight, but it's not going to be as physically taxing in terms of having a 300-pound man all over you, pushing you all over the ring, constantly throwing punches. I don't think it will be as taxing from a cardiovascular perspective for Dillian Whyte taking on Ortiz as it would be taking on a Jarrell Miller. So, yeah, I know a lot of people, probably most people are going to disagree with me, but I personally think that I'd be more inclined to pick Whyte over Ortiz than I would Whyte over Miller. I don't mean I would pick Whyte over Ortiz. I'd just be more inclined to than Whyte over Miller, you know, for the reasons I've explained. But anyway, yeah, those of you who haven't seen this interview, go and have a watch of it for yourselves. And let me know what you think about all the points I've raised in this particular video. Again, I don't want people to come at me sideways and misconstrue what I've said. I would love to see Whyte versus Ortiz, Whyte versus Miller. These are all great fights. And I certainly do not believe that Dillian Whyte is afraid of physically trading blows with Luis Ortiz. Hell no. But he is looking at it as a risk-reward situation. Just as Deontay Wilder looks at some things, risk-reward. Tyson Fury definitely looks at some fights, risk-reward, weighs it up and says, it's not really for me. Because that's what Tyson Fury did when he signed with Frank Warren rather than Matchroom. Because he could have had the Tony Bellew fight, he could have had the Dillian Whyte fight en route to AJ. He chose not to go that way. The risk-reward wasn't good enough as far as he was concerned. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.